She was the tallest at the auction. A short rancher climbed a crate to kiss her. I keep the crate. People think that's a strange thing to hold on to. Rotted seed crate, 2 missing slats, smells like the old feed barn no matter where I store it. My daughter asked me once why I didn't burn it for kindling, and I said because there are certain things in a man's life he doesn't burn for kindling. She looked at me the way she does and let it go. The crate is out in the linta now, leaning against the north wall where nothing else goes. I see it every morning when I go to saddle up. Sometimes I stop and put my hand on the top board, the one that's still solid, and I can feel the grain of it through my palm. Then I go about my day. That's all I want to say about the crate for now. It'll come back around. My name is Cleet Farrow. I run cattle on 214 acres in the Bitterroot Valley, and I have done so for 22 years. Before that I did things I don't talk about in particular detail. Things that belong to a younger and considerably stupider version of me. Things I have worked to outpace every day since I came to this valley with $40, a horse that wasn't mine by papers though I'd earned her, and a genuine and bone-deep desire to become someone different than who I'd been. I am 5'4½". The half matters. I will tell you that right now and get it out of the way because this whole story runs through it. I have been 5'4½" since I was 16 years old, and I long ago made my peace with the fact that no amount of good eating was going to change anything. Men are the height they are. I am this height. I am also broad through the chest and shoulders, strong in the hands, clear in the eye, and I know cattle the way some men know the Bible, chapter and verse, whole passages by feel. Those things I also own without apology. But I was a short man in a territory that noticed such things, and that is weight, and I will not pretend otherwise. The auction I'm talking about happened in September, which is the best month in the Bitterroot if you are lucky enough to be there for it. Aspens going yellow on the slopes. Air cold in the morning and warm by noon and cold again by 4. Everything smells like pine sap and turned earth, and the faint promise of the hard months to come. It was a livestock auction at the Colton Fairgrounds, twice a year whether you needed it or not. Half the valley showed up because half the valley needed to buy or sell something, and the other half showed up because there was nothing much better to do on a September Saturday and Colton had a pie stand. I was there to look at a bull. Gray Galloway, 4 years old, and I'd heard good things from the Hennessy outfit about his get. I wasn't planning to buy anything else. I wasn't planning for anything that happened. I should say something about the months before that auction, because they matter. I had been for a long time a man alone, not pitifully alone, not tragically alone. Just alone. I worked the ranch with 2 hands, young men named Orlo and Dix, and I paid them fair and we got along, but come evening they went to the bunkhouse and I went to the main house, and I ate whatever I'd put together, and I sat on the porch until the cold drove me in. I'd had a woman once early on, the kind of early on that has a shimmer to it when you look back, before the shimmer gets worn off by the actual memory of how it ended. She left because she said she couldn't make a life with a man who wouldn't talk about himself, which was a fair and accurate reading of me at the time. I didn't argue with her about it. After that, I put my head down and built the ranch. That took years. It took the kind of years that have so much work in them you look up one day and realize a decade went by, and you can't account for where most of it went because it went into the ground, into fence posts and irrigation ditches and sick calves and markets that broke bad 2 years running and a barn fire in the 3rd. You build anyway. You don't know what else to do. By September of that year, the ranch was solid. Not wealthy. Solid. The kind of solid where you go to bed knowing it'll be there when you wake up, and that is not a small thing. I was 47 years old. I wore the same hat I'd worn for 9 years, replacing the band twice but keeping the crown because it had shaped itself to my head, and why would you start over? I shaved on Sundays and when I was going somewhere, which was not that different from Sundays. I was, by most observable measurements, a man who had settled into himself and was not waiting for anything in particular. That is the condition I was in when I first saw Nora Voss. She was standing at the fence near the bull pens. I don't know why I noticed her first, except that she was hard not to notice. She was tall, which I will get to, and she was standing very still in a way that most people at a livestock auction are not. Most people mill. They chat. They look around to see who else is there and make calculations about it. She was looking at a pen of young heifers with the kind of attention that meant she was actually thinking about them, actually assessing them, not performing assessment. I noticed that before I noticed anything else about her. Then I got closer, and I saw the rest of it. She was, and I am not a man who reaches for words usually, but I am reaching now. She was a striking woman. Not pretty in the way that word usually gets used, which is soft and arranged. She was striking the way a landscape is striking, something you keep looking at because it keeps having more to it. Dark hair, a few silver threads coming in at the temples that she was clearly not concerned about hiding. Wide jaw, eyes that were a particular shade of gray-green I had not seen before. And she was tall. She was genuinely, remarkably tall for a woman, close to my height plus another 4 or 5 inches, I reckoned. And she stood in it easily, without any of the apologizing for vertical space that tall women sometimes do. She just stood there, looking at those heifers, occupying the ground she occupied. I walked up to the fence near her because I wanted to look at the heifers too, and the heifers were in that direction, and I am a man who walks toward what he wants to look at. That's all it was. She said without looking at me, "The one in the back left corner is going to be your best producer. The others are fine, that one's exceptional." I looked at the heifer she meant, looked at her for a while, then I said, "Yeah, I see it." "Most people pass right by her," she said. "Most people don't know what they're looking at," I said. She turned and looked at me then, not a slow look, a direct one, the kind that takes you in and files what it finds. I filed her right back. "Nora Voss," she said. "I bought the Aldrin place 6 weeks ago." "I heard somebody bought it," I said. "Cleet Farrow, I'm 2 ridges north." "I know who you are," she said. "People told me." I didn't ask what they told her. People told newcomers things about their neighbors, and the things they told about me were various, depending on who was doing the telling. I had neighbors who thought I was a good cattleman and a reliable man to do business with. I had neighbors who thought I was peculiar and too quiet and strange about my past. I let them all talk. Correcting it wasn't worth my time. We stood at that fence for a while and talked about the heifers and then about her place, the Aldrin spread, which needed fencing work and had an irrigation problem on the south field that Aldrin had been ignoring for years. I knew that place. I told Aldrin about that south field 3 separate times. She had figured it out in 6 weeks. I bought the bull. She bought 4 of the heifers, including the one she'd spotted, and the transaction required them to be sorted into her trailer, which took a while, and I stayed because I didn't have any particular reason to hurry elsewhere. We talked some more while they sorted. She had been married, her husband dead 3 years from a fever that took him fast and didn't give her time to prepare, which she said plainly, without making an event of it. She had a daughter in Missoula. She had run the place her husband owned in the Judith Basin for 2 years after he died, and then sold it at a price that surprised everyone and come south to start fresh. Start fresh. At her age, which was, I guessed later, she told me the following spring, 43. I respected that. I did not ask if I could call on her. That is not how I do things. I am not a man who moves in the obvious direction at the obvious time just because it's expected. I said it had been good to meet her, and that I hoped the Southfield situation was fixable, and I went and got my truck and drove home. But I thought about her. I thought about her that whole evening, and I won't dress it up. I sat on the porch in the dark, and I thought about a woman who could spot a heifer and knew the shape of her own situation and didn't lean on sympathy or wait for anyone to carry her. The crate. I should explain the crate now. You've been patient. The Colton Harvest Dance was 3 weeks after the auction. It happened every year in the big feed barn at the end of Colton's Main Street, which was cleaned out and strung with lanterns and smelled like hay and candle wax and coffee from the big percolating pots they set up near the door. I went most years. I am not a dancing man, but I am a present man, which is different. I would go and drink the coffee and talk to the people I had business with and watch the evening happen around me. She was there, Nora Voss. She came with a woman named Calla Bremer who had the hardware store in Colton and was a person of significant social standing in the valley by virtue of being the person who had the parts you needed. They came in together and took up a position near the coffee, which I noticed because that is where I was. I walked over, we talked. Calla Bremer talked at some length about the price of wire, which was a legitimate topic, and Nora and I talked around that and through it, and I found that she had opinions about things other than cattle, about the territory, about what was coming, about the question of whether the valley would stay small or whether the railroad men would get their way and change things. She had thought about these questions, and she said what she thought. I liked that about her. There was a man named Garfield Oates who was at that dance. I want to be precise about who Garfield Oates was. He was tall, well over 6 feet, and handsome in a broad, obvious way, and he had a ranch that was bigger than mine by virtue of it being his father's and then his, not something he'd built. He was not a bad man. I don't want to make him into a villain because this story doesn't need one. He was just the kind of man the valley tended to look at and see. Important, substantial, the obvious candidate for anything. He made his way over to Nora Voss within 20 minutes of her arrival. He was attentive to her in the way tall men sometimes are with tall women, a kind of recognition, like they've found something that belongs together naturally. I watched this happen from a distance. I was talking to Dale Kincaid about hay prices, and I was paying attention to the conversation, and I was also watching. Nora was polite to Garfield Oates. She talked to him. She did not, as far as I could read from where I stood, go soft with it, but she was polite. I finished my conversation with Dale Kincaid and got more coffee and did not go back over to where Nora and Oates were standing. I am not a man who inserts himself into situations. If something is meant to happen, it finds its own shape. Around 9 o'clock there was a lull in the music and somebody produced a crate from the old Barker Seed Company, 2 missing slats, exactly the one I am talking about, and put it in the middle of the barn floor for standing on, which was a thing that happened at Colton dances for reasons I never fully understood. Some tradition from before my time in the valley. People would get up on it and say something. A joke, a toast, a declaration of some kind. It was voluntary. It was the kind of thing that required either nerve or enough whiskey. A couple of men got up and said the kinds of things men say at these occasions. Someone toasted the good harvest. Someone made a joke about the county assessor that got a laugh. Then Nora Voss walked over to that crate and stepped up onto it. The barn went quiet in the way that means everyone has noticed something significant is happening. She stood up there, and she was now on that crate an even more considerable vertical presence, and she looked around the room slowly, not performing, assessing, the same look she'd had at the fence near the heifers. Then she looked directly at me. "There is a man in this barn," she said, and her voice carried easily, the kind of voice that doesn't need to raise itself, "who spotted the same heifer I spotted and knew why and didn't need to be told. There is a man in this barn who has 214 acres he built himself from nothing, which is a thing this valley apparently knows but has not properly appreciated." She paused. "There is a man in this barn who has not once in 6 weeks of being my neighbor asked me a single question I didn't want to answer, and who has not said a single word to me that was either too much or not enough." The barn was very quiet. "Cleet Farrow," she said, "I'd be obliged if you'd come up here. I will tell you what I felt. I will try to be accurate about it rather than romantic. I felt, and this is the truth, a thing shift in my chest that I hadn't known was stuck. Some tightness that had lived in me so long I'd stopped noticing it. It shifted and let go, and I stood there for a half a second with my coffee cup in my hand, feeling the strange lightness of that. Then I walked over to the crate. She stepped off it. I looked at her. I looked at the crate. I looked at the room full of people who were watching, some of them smiling, some of them uncertain, Garfield Oates somewhere in the back with a neutral expression he was working to hold. I stepped up onto the crate. Now I was taller than her, maybe 2 inches, maybe 3. She was looking up at me. Those gray-green eyes, something in them that wasn't quite a smile but was built out of the same materials. I said quietly enough that the barn had to stay quiet to hear it. "You're sure?" "Cleet," she said, in a tone that meant she'd already thought about it more than I had. I stepped off the crate and kissed her. Not a long kiss, not a performance. Just her mouth and my hand on her jaw and the slight coolness of her skin from the outside air still on her and the smell of pine sap from her coat. 6 or 8 seconds. Then I stepped back. The barn let out its breath. There was noise after that, and laughter, and someone started the music again, and Calla Bremer looked like she had organized this whole thing from the beginning and was satisfied with how it had come out. Nora looked at me with a particular expression. Even, direct, warm, full of something private that the public event had just made room for. "The South Field," I said. "I can look at it Thursday if that works." "Thursday works," she said. "I want to tell you what the months after that were, because they were not simple, and it would be dishonest to make them seem so. She was a stubborn woman. I want to be plain about this. She had run her own place and made her own decisions for 3 years, and the muscle of that was well developed, and it did not always move in harmony with my thinking. We had arguments. Not screaming, not breaking things. I am not that kind of man, and she was not that kind of woman. But genuine disagreements. The kind that require you to either think harder or hold your ground. And sometimes she was right, and I had to think harder, and sometimes I was right, and she had to hold. And sometimes we were both right about different parts of the same thing, and we had to figure out how to put the two parts together. I found that I liked this about her. I realized, tired of no resistance. A man builds a ranch alone for 22 years, he gets used to his own judgment going unchallenged. But unchallenged judgment gets lazy. Hers kept mine honest. There was a night in February of that first winter, cold like a living thing pressing on the walls, wind coming out of the north with nothing between it and us, when I told her things about my past that I had not told anyone in the valley. Things that had been the reason I'd come here in the first place. Things I am not going to tell you now because they don't belong to this story in detail, only in shape. I had done wrong by people. I had been young and I had been reckless, and the consequences had reached further than I'd intended, as consequences do. I had spent 22 years being a different kind of man, and I still carried the shape of what I'd been. She listened to the whole thing. The fire burned down while I talked, and I let it burn because I didn't want to stop, and I didn't want the interruption of feeding it. When I was done, she was quiet for a while. Then she said, "I know you're telling me this because you think I should know before things go further. I appreciate that. Now I'm going to tell you what I think." She thought that a man's worth was not fixed in his worst year. She thought it accumulated or depleted over time depending on what he chose to do, and that what I had chosen to do, for a significant stretch of time, was build something solid and be honest about it, and not ask anyone to carry what was mine to carry. She thought that was the relevant information. She said this plainly, without sentiment. She was not absolving me, she was not in the business of absolution, and I didn't want that anyway. She was telling me what she saw. The thing she saw was worth something because of who she was. A woman who looked at heifers and spotted the exceptional one in the back corner, not the obvious ones up front. She saw what was there, not what was presented. My chest did the thing again, that unlocking. I said, "You're a particular kind of woman." She said, "So I've been told," and put more wood on the fire. We were married in June. Outside, near the old cottonwood on her property, the south field finally fixed. The fence runs straight the way it should have been run 12 years before. Calla Bremer stood up with her. Orlo and Dick stood up with me. There were 20-odd people from the valley, including, I'll say, Garfield Oates, who shook my hand and meant it. The vows were short. We'd both said what we had to say over the winter. The ceremony was for other people. The marriage had already begun. The thing I remember most from that day, more than the vows, more than the dinner after, more than any of it, is a moment that happened while we were waiting for the preacher to finish settling his papers. She was standing beside me under that cottonwood in a dress the color of cream, and she put her hand through my arm and leaned the side of her head briefly against my shoulder, that slight pressure, and then straightened. She didn't look at me when she did it. She just held on for a second, then let go. That was when I knew the shape of what we were. 14 years now. I will not catalog them. They have had in them the things that years have in them, lean periods and good ones, a drought year that was close and an irrigation project that saved us, her daughter married and the grandchildren coming along. Arguments resolved and unresolved. The ordinary accumulation of a life shared, which is the only kind of accumulation that matters. I am 61 years old. I still wear a hat. The one that shaped itself to my head finally gave out at year 12, and I started a new one which is beginning now to shape itself properly. These things take time. Nora is in the house right now. I can hear her through the window, the sound of the coffee grinder, which she does by hand because she says the electric one makes it bitter, and she's right about this. I can smell the coffee from here. After a while I'll go in and we'll sit across the table from each other and we'll talk about the day's work, or we won't talk much, and that will be fine too. The crate is in the lean-to. I put my hand on it every morning, not because I need reminding, I don't. But there are certain things that represent the before and after of a man's life, and this is one of mine. A rotted seed crate I climbed to stand at her level in front of the whole valley, and then stepped off to meet her face to face. I was a short man, I still am. And she stepped off that crate and looked up at me, and I kissed her. And that was the night the Bitterroot Valley learned what I already knew about myself. That a man's size is in what he's built, and what he stands for, and whether he goes toward what he wants without flinching. I am Cleet Pharaoh. I run 214 acres, now closer to 400 with the adjoining parcel we bought in year 7. I have a good woman who spotted me the way she spotted that heifer, looked past the obvious choices, and picked the one in the back corner that had the thing she was looking for. I don't know what she was looking for exactly. I've asked her once or twice, and she says she isn't sure she can put words to it. She just saw it. She looked at me and she saw it. That's enough for me. That is more than enough. That's everything. The coffee grinder has stopped. In a minute she'll pour water from the kettle that's been sitting on the back of the stove, the iron one with the chip in the spout that neither of us has bothered to replace, because it still works, and there's no reason to replace things that still work. She'll call me when it's ready, or she won't call me and I'll just go in when I smell it properly. I'm going in now.